Hello and welcome to my submission for the course Conlang Circus 4. Just a heads up, I'm a computer scientist and not a linguist, so I don't know that much about Conlangs and have picked up most stuff about them from you. I'm not even sure what the proper definition of a language is or how to apply it, but given that Tuttocreole has verbs, I'm comfortably calling it a language. Let's start with the lore. In another world, after yet another world war, scientists of various branches were tasked with finding the root of most evil, and after a lot of deliberation and collaboration between countries and regions, they declared that it was the fact that not everybody can understand everyone else. So the linguists of this world were tasked with coming up with a solution. The idea that they settled on is to have a global language that everyone speaks to allow all people to communicate with each other. However, as you might know, this was tried before with little success. So in order to actually achieve the goal this time, the language should be easy to understand, quick to learn, approachable for everyone, but most importantly, fair. More on that later. Due to the many differences in languages across the world, both spoken and written, there isn't really a single language that is easy to learn for all humankind. Or is there? The solution the linguists came up with is to just let people keep talking in their own language, but construct the circumstances in which, due to semantic drift, the languages converge into a single language, the ultimate Creole. The main question is now how to construct these circumstances for a global linguistic convergence. At this point in the presentation, a few world leaders voiced concerns that would mean that smaller languages might get lost or ignored, and that they are not fine with losing their heritage. The linguists assured them that if they get more funding, they will make sure to document and conserve as many languages before the Great Convergence. Additionally, they want to show that if Tuttocreole is adopted worldwide, the percentage each dialect makes up of the total population's vocabulary stays the same, and the mathematical distance between people's vocabulary does not increase on average, and it should also decrease often. And for that, we need some more math. To make sure that it actually works, we can't just write down some mathematical proofs that our theorems are true. What if we make some mistake or get to cover a case? So, the main part of this video will be about proving mathematical statements about Tuttocreole in the functional programming language and theorem prover Lean 4. As a very short introduction, Lean can be used as a theorem prover, which means that if you write down a mathematical statement you want to prove, then do some stuff, and if you get no warnings or errors, the proof is correct and you're done. First of all, we need to be able to actually model the way that Tuttocreole changes people's vocabulary. We represent the population as a single matrix where each row represents a single person and each column represents a single language, dialect, or subdialect. Then, each entry is how much a single person's personal vocabulary, manner of speak, writing, etc. consists of that subdialect. This means that, because these are percentages, the sum of each person's dialect should sum up to exactly 1. For the same reason, each dialect should be at least 0. The last assumption we make is that there is at least one person, because this makes later theorems a bit easier to deal with. As a short example for how this works, we can now use Lean to prove the fact that a single dialect can be at most 1 or 100% of a person's vocabulary. The proof for this is not too long, but I won't be explaining it here due to time constraints. The compiler doesn't show any warnings or errors and even shows this little tick mark here, so we know the proof is correct. To actually reason about Tuttocreole conserving vocabulary, we first need to define under which operation it conserves it. We'll define a conversation on our model between two people with a weight between 0 and 1. The weight will be how much vocabulary is exchanged between the two people. So if person A has a vector A describing their vocabulary and person B the vector B, each person will take some part W from their conversation partner and keep the remaining 1 minus W they had before. We can then directly translate this into Lean, where we construct a new model with these changes. We also need to show that the other invariants are kept with this new model, but it isn't that difficult. Now that we have the definitions, we can finally prove what we want to. For example, for a model and two different people no matter which dialect is looked at and which weight between 0 and 1 is chosen, the sum of the dialect across the population doesn't change after a conversation. Now we just need to prove it. The proof is alright. It's quite long, but because this proof does a lot of heavy lifting, it can be used directly to show that the average of each dialect of a population does not change, which is exactly the first of the 3 criteria. To show the other 2 criteria, we need to define the distance of a dialect between people. We'll simply use the standard deviation across the population. Then the second criterion looks like this. For our model and 2 arbitrary people, if we look at a single subdialect and a weight between 0 and 1, then that dialect's distance across the population after that conversation will not be more than before the conversation. The proof is complicated, so let's break it down. We'll first check whether the weight is either equal to 0 or 1, since a conversation with a weight of 0 doesn't influence the vocabulary of either person at all. And if the weight is 1, they just swap dialects. For that reason, the proof is also not that complicated, but still surprisingly long. Some parts of this were solved by automatic tactics. In this case, the distribution doesn't change. We now need to prove the statement for when the weight is strictly larger than 0 and strictly less than 1. We'll do another case distinction on whether or not the 2 people that have a conversation are actually 2 different people, since you don't tend to change your own vocabulary if you talk to yourself. Again, the proof is not complicated and the distribution doesn't change. We now only need to prove the case that these are 2 different people. Our last case distinction is whether or not the 2 people have different vocabulary. Again, and for the last time, the proof is not complicated and the distribution doesn't change. So now we know that the weight of the conversation is strictly between 0 and 1, the 2 people having the conversation are not the same person, and their vocabularies are different. Using this, we need now to prove the general case under these conditions. That can't be that complicated, right? Right? Oh look, in this case the inequality is strict, and it only took me like a week. So we know exactly when the error is actually reduced, which is when the weight is strictly between 0 and 1. There are 2 different people and the vocabularies of the 2 people are different. In all other cases, the error stays the same before and after the conversation. And since that covers all cases, we're also done with the second criterion. Going back to the linguists, they now have the proofs the world leaders wanted to see. They are satisfied, but the main linguist presenting the findings continues. This is, of course, contingent on a few things. It requires that Tuttocreole be introduced in all countries at the same time, but we can just agree on a single day on which we will start speaking language. It would also not work if there were some people that were keen to control which words are used. Some conversations weren't one-on-one. Some governments wanted to influence the way that people of their country speak. Certain countries had a larger media dominance, leading to people consuming more content of that language or dialect. Some people could be added to the population or removed, or if people from one specific country or culture were generally adverse to speaking a language that is French. But thankfully, none of that is the case, so we can be sure that the 3 criteria shown before hold true. And with that, the project Tuttocreole was created and was, against all reason, instantiated on the 1st of January 2 years later. The fact that they did not initially plan for a way to write down the language was hand-waved away by throwing buzzwords like semantic drift and Monte Carlo annealing into the room, and the result was, predictably, a slightly modified Latin script. Because, against their first plans, the language mainly spread through written form, the phonology was so inconsistent that even though many countries vowed to employ linguists to make sense of this mess, they have been getting further and further behind, only making some ground in the last couple of decades. Similar effects and efforts were done on the front of semantics. However, at the end, they did achieve their goal of a single unified language. The following are two translations, the first in the style of someone speaking Tuttocreole in central Germany around 7 years after it was first introduced. It is thought that the vocabulary has its basis in German and English with influences in French, Dutch, Japanese and Chinese. Quelque majestätisch, sicherlich et ne aurus pas en lume infini. Nochen tu la rue de Nugen, no Hymie, jö Chungsheng einrollen. Mon Dieu! Genre schließen sich Fleiß, das Sasitei, Crocs taille blesses, Foucault selbst. Es nance le sien, als ob il sont le code du chien bougeant. Il trinkt its own code zu tui, comme si la symphonie l'éternité. And the following is another translation from the same text fragment, spoken 2 years after the global language conversion was achieved. Sadly, due to the long time between the introduction of Tuttocreole and the conversion, the original languages are lost to time. Une bête à la fois dévoreuse et dévorée, on murmure englouti par son propre écho, le manche que rampant. Véritable témoignage du chant funèbre ininterrompu du trance, gravé à jamais dans mon cœur et celui du monde.